3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you feeling?
Well, to be very honest with you, I feel much better than I did yesterday and a couple of days before.
I was afraid that you're not going to make it today in studio, but I'm glad to see you.
Well, you may feel like you're looking at me, but you could probably be looking at a figment of your imagination.
Interesting. A warm welcome to you all, our Facebook followers are watching us live from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka the man. Once again, Shaka is here live, and in a moment we'll be taking your questions and comments. Shaka, let's start off in Kenya. Very interesting developments today in the Republic of Kenya. Raila Odinga, as promised, delivered his symbolic oath. He went ahead and did it. What's your thoughts about this whole thing?
Symbolically and, of course, ritualistically dumbfounding. To be very honest with you, I thought that he could probably pull it off, but I could not believe that he could actually do that at the popular Uhuru Park, named after Kenyan founding president Jomo Kenyatta himself, who happens to be the father of incumbent president Uhuru Kenyatta.
There is something about the personality of Raila Odinga, or the people that he represents. There is something that I haven't quite figured out. What is it? What makes Raila tick? Is it the type of person who wants to be a perpetual opposition leader, who wants to be around as an opposition leader? Because let's face it, he could have actually won the election if he had chosen to run again after the Supreme Court ruled in his favor.
You keep, for some strange reason, you keep going back to that issue of saying, if he could have actually competed in the fresh, presidential rerun on October 26, that he could probably have won. What you forget is that there is no way in the world, under any circumstances, anyone else, with the exception of incumbent president Uhuru Kenyatta, would have actually won that race. It was a race that was designed, in a sense, where Uhuru was in fact running against Kenyatta. The fact of the matter is the IEBC, you know what it did to the August 8th election. Yes, it is true that the August 8th election was annulled by the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court did not call out the specific individuals who who pretty much messed up that election. We're talking about people like Ezra Chiroba, for example, the CEO of the IEBC. You know about that man. We don't even talk about Chris Musando, the key guy who was in fact in charge of the IT department of the IEBC, how he was killed about 9 days before the election and all that kind of stuff. You heard that people talk about, oh, you know what? This was about, maybe love or something of that sort, because they killed a very young lady and killed the guy and just made sure that they were lying, along each other and stuff like that. There are a lot of factors, including the fact that the chairman of the IEBC himself, much earlier, Mr. Chebukati had actually said he could not guarantee that the institution was capable of delivering the sort of election that had been actually ordered by the Supreme Court. You also remember the other commissioner from New Jersey, Dr. Kombe, how she pretty much ran for the nearest political tall grass of New York. And you remember what she said? She said there was no way, under the circumstances, that institution was capable of carrying out an exercise that reflected the instructions or the orders of the Supreme Court of Kenya. So I don't know, when you talk about he should regret the fact that he didn't run because he could have won. How could you win? this is not an election, mind you, that is determined, or whose results are determined, frankly, on the basis of reflecting the will of the people. If it had been an election to be determined by the will of the people, he obviously could have won. Not only did he, in fact, win 2017, according at least to that theory, he could also have actually had one much earlier in 2013. And there's no doubt probably in anybody's mind, even a man called Mwai Kibaki, the kid from Nyeri, that in fact Raila Amolo Odinga beat him in 2008. But you know what happened? So we should be very careful when we talk about he could have won if he had run. No. This man is looking for what he says is electoral justice. It's not about him. It's about the system and the people of Kenya.
Well, Shaka, I beg to disagree. I think there are all indications that suggest that it's all about him. He wants to be the perpetual opposition leader in that country.
He does not, of course, want to be perpetual opposition leader. In fact, if you probably wanted to say exactly what you wanted to say, he definitely wants to be the legitimate leader of the Republic of Kenya. And why not? He's a Kenyan.
But Shaka, let's face it. What is going to happen? We have President Uhuru Kenyatta, who's quote-unquote the legitimate president of Kenya, and we have Raila Amolo Odinga, who is quote-unquote the legitimate president of the People's Republic of Kenya. What's the difference? Maybe help us understand the two distinctions, and going forward, what should Kenyans expect?
Paul, I think that we've talked about, we've danced around some of these things really for quite some time. We should probably look at some other angles and all that kind of stuff that are helpful probably to help the audience, frankly, put things in context.
But you're not talking to me,
I
you're
will
talking
come
to the
back
audience.
to you again and say, when you talk about an individual wanting to be the perpetual opposition leader, what is there in somebody being a leader, perpetual leader of the opposition? They want the whole enchilada.
Just irrelevant.
They want the whole enchilada. They want to be the legitimate president of Kenya or whichever country they are basically competing in. I'll tell you one thing, my brother. I know that I'm reasonably popular in the Republic of Uganda, and that there are a lot of people who do have some political ambitions in me. And if I were to offer myself, for example, in Uganda, given that the political playing field would be leveled, which of course it is not, and if I found that the political playing fields were not leveled, you'd think that given my popularity, if I headed to the nearest Mavira forest, saying that all those people who support the kid from Kabale should follow me so that we can regroup, reorganize, and figure out how to march towards Entebbe State House, you would probably be surprised that if the Kabale kid looked back, there probably wouldn't be anybody. So if you have a guy like Raila Amolo Odinga playing the kind of role that he is playing, and yet when you look around him, there are people. Some of these people are so sycophantic. They are not only willing to die for him, they're obviously, in the process, even willing to kill for him.
But what happened to the principals? The principals all disappeared at the last time.
Well, those are principals, in which case they are not leaders anyway. They're not leaders. They are there for something. These are people, if you look in their track records, in fact, their credibility is questioned. A man like Kalonzo Musyoka, for example. Remember, he became a vice president in the 2008 election, which had been stolen by Mr. Mwai Kibaki. I remember him when he was vice president in a BBC interview right here in Washington, D.C. He was actually being asked whether, in fact, the election of 2007 was credible. Not only did he say the election had actually been credible, he talked about how transparent it was, how free and fair, and verifiable. Obviously, you have to defend that because guess what? He was the vice president. He had cut a deal much earlier, just before the election came, because he knew precisely that there was no way in the world he could win the election. But at the same time, he probably didn't very much wish for Raila to win the whole thing at that time. But my friend, when you listen to him lately, you will hear him figure out a way of telling you smoothly a story of 2008 elections. You hear him talk about how, for example, he had hoped that he would somehow pass through the middle of Emilio Mwai Kibaki and Raila Amolo Odinga and become the president of Kenya, and that even though his votes were stolen, they did not probably steal as many votes as they stole from Raila Amolo Odinga. He's telling you this in 2017, in 2018, about a situation that occurred in 2007 and 8. So a man like that, to be very honest with you, you'll be very, very careful to take his word to your bank account. So the thing is, there was a time when, for example, he went to Germany, frankly, in fairness to him, his wife was sick, undergoing treatment and stuff like that, where he spent for the next 4 months. The Railas in Kenya continued postponing the possibility of swearing in because they needed him there. He kept sending one of the governors,
and today he was missing in action.
Yeah, but he also said something today, that his bodyguards actually were removed. What has the removal of his bodyguards and the swearing in of Raila Odinga and himself to do with this kind of stuff? But he talked about that, and he said he hoped that, in fact, their supporters would understand, would put things in context. Look, he said in Machakos several weeks ago that he was not on the same page with what January 30th, was supposed really to mean. He instead appealed for dialogue. He kept appealing for dialogue because he said, no matter what, at the end of the day, you're going to have a dialogue to reach a solution that reflects, at least the concerns or interests, the best interests of Kenya.
But
he said nobody took him up seriously. But guess what? The people shouted him down. They said they no longer are interested in dialogue. They want you guys to go to Uhuru Park and get sworn in. Mr. Wycliffe Mudavadi. Mudavadi also talked about, frankly, he was not very enthusiastic about this business of swearing in. But he also admitted that the people themselves were actually taking the lead. They did not sincerely believe in the Kenyan politicians anymore. They felt that they are the ones now who should actually be in the front line, just like cannon fodder, to become the political cannon fodder that they often are anyway.
Let's go to the comments. We seem to be getting a lot of comments from Kenya. But let's start in Ndora, Zambia. One Karen Mumba wants to know who is the president of Kenya as we speak. We have two people who claim to be presidents of Kenya.
It is very interesting, that I did share the last audio, a very interesting audio, where some African presidents or leaders were playing football against European, the European team and all that kind of stuff, of course, which also included the US President Donald Trump. Well, there's no question that if you look at the Constitution of Kenya, you look at the laws of Kenya, the legal president is Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta is the one that was declared to be the winner of the last election, whether somebody accepts it or does not accept it. That is a fact that you have to live with, because the only body, the only institution that you have to listen to at the end of the day in terms of one election, according to the Kenyan Constitution, is the IEBC. So because of that, it is Uhuru Kenyatta who happens to be legally the president of Kenya. And as we talk, he occupies State House in Nairobi. He has unfettered access to the instruments of power. He is the commander-in-chief of the Kenyan Armed Forces, and all that kind of stuff. But as far as the issue of legitimacy is concerned, there could very well be two people right now who are in contention for who is the legitimate president of Kenya.
So let's go to another comment. Portia Bosiano in Manchester. Is the swearing of Raila, will the swearing of Raila Odinga affect the Jubilee government in any way?
Well, I think it has affected it a lot because, let's face it, you could see clearly that the Jubilee government has been panicking. First of all, the president summoned the editors of the media to State House. And among the things they talked about was he ordered them. He may not have said that, but you see, when you are in the presence of a president, there is such a thing, Paul, as presidential order. I don't know whether you had seen it or not. You can read into that whether there is intimidation, whether somebody is threatening you and all that kind of stuff, and look at the language used and the body language. And that will add up to whatever you want to read into that. Now, when I look at what I have read, I look at the fact that, for example, the government shut down the media, for example. Can you talk about democracy in any country without, in fact, observing the rule of law, without observing the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press? Can you talk about democracy?
Well, some critics would maybe liken that to a dictatorship. I don't know if you share the same view.
You can obviously call it whatever you want, but you can't definitely even dare call that a democratic sort of environment. So if, in fact, the Jubilee government was not scared of what was going on, then tell me, can you tell me the reason why it made sure that the media could not report on the story? Why couldn't the media report on a story that obviously, whether you like it or not, a story in which the public had an interest? This is a great story. How often do you see these types of stories in the world? Later on in Africa, for that matter. Have you ever seen anything like this in Africa?
Not quite. Maybe we've seen another president in Uganda, a people's president in Uganda, but his movement doesn't seem to have taken any hostages. It's still like in the making.
What about even the optics itself? The optics. I mean, you couldn't make any comparisons. There's no comparison in terms of the optics. When Colonel Dr. Chiza Besigye, retired but not tired, declared himself president and actually subjected himself to a sort of swearing-in ceremony. You cannot compare with then and what you saw in Uhuru Park today.
Okay, let's go to another comment from Anthony Neil. He says, Raila Odinga is a typical African troublemaker. The government must ignore his unnecessary provocation and deal with him strategically. Do you agree?
No, I don't. And in fact, on the contrary, Raila Odinga, whether you like him or not, and this is not the business of love, by the way. This is not the business of romance. This is serious business of life and death. Raila Odinga represents a legitimate political constituency in Kenya. And there is no way you're going to have to ignore that. And in order for you to be able to solve some of the issues that affect that particular constituency, guess who you may have to go through? Raila Amolo Odinga. It was in fact very unfortunate, sincerely, that it had to come to this, because Uhuru Kenyatta had the opportunity to listen to the voices, both domestic, regional, and international, that there should be a dialogue. Talk about things like electoral justice and what have you. And why not? Let's face it, a man called Mwai Kibaki stole the election. In 2008, he was approached that there should be a dialogue. He actually initially was very intransigent that he would not under any circumstances. But guess what? Eventually he did.
How would you respond to critics who said that actually President Uhuru Kenyatta should take credit because all he could have done, other than shutting the media, he could also have sent soldiers to unleash terror on the people who are lining up to see their president in Uhuru Park, but he did not. They chose not to send any police people to beat up people or to antagonize these people.
You're right. For whatever reason he did, because in fact it was reported that they had organized more than 20,000 police and the paramilitary who are going to be in control of what was going on at the Uhuru Park. So what happened? At the last minute, I think probably he saw reason, given that he does have, let's face it, he has something ongoing in The Hague, resulting from also very interestingly and ironically from pretty much the same experience, an election of 2007. The fact of the matter is, if he had enlisted the police, to be honest with you, it probably could have spelled the beginning of the end of his presidency.
Interesting.
So I think that he was very, very wise to make sure that he didn't do that. But on the other hand, he really made himself in damaged goods because he can no longer offer himself as the fountain of honor, as somebody that believes in democracy, especially when you make sure that you shut down the media. Then there is a problem.
Well, the Ugandan president has done it before. Several other presidents who have had elections that have been quote-unquote not legitimate elections have done similar things. What stops Uhuru Kenyatta from doing
that?
So?
That is very true, but at least I know that at least according to some people, including my brother Porondio himself, he used to hold a man called Uhuru Kenyatta in very high esteem, in a totally different league from those names that you have mentioned. As a matter of fact, even Raila Odinga himself, who happens to be a friend, so to speak, of Yoweri Museveni, said, Kenya is not Uganda. They are in two totally different leagues. You're talking about a country that has the history of Mau Mau, a serious, very, very serious armed struggle to kick out the European colonizers, the settler, Kenya was a settler colony. Mau Mau is a Swahili word, acronym meaning Muzungu akirudi Ulaya, Mwafrika atapata uhuru. Meaning if the European can be sent back to Europe, the African will be free, will be independent. It is true that that happened, but then what happened? Apparently, there is a very small clique of Kenyans who have since taken over the reins of power for themselves, their families and their friends, and not for the country, not for the rest of the people. So in fact, there is a perception that there are some people who think they own the country. And in fact, they may look as black as you and me, but they in fact play the same role, exact role, just like the Lord Delemeas from the United Kingdom used to play in Kenya.
Let's go to another commenter from Ben Zulu. What is happening in Kenya is politically contagious. It may spread to other countries in Africa. African leaders are not helping the continent to grow. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben has a point. I mean, the thing is, instead of Africans, frankly, first of all, having the vision thing, and not simply saying, the vision thing means that I'm the only person, the only individual who has the right to think where I think the nation should go. The rest of you, my fellow countrymen and women, all you need to do it simply implement and execute my vision thing. What they need to do sincerely, they need to come up with the vision in terms of education curriculum. A new curriculum, for example, that frankly shapes the type of educational curriculum that teaches people new tools, new skill sets that can not only help to provide employment to a lot of these young people who are unemployed, even though they can actually go to universities, work very hard and get degrees, and yet they spend the next 5 years basically infantry, walking downtown trying to look for something to eat. What do you expect those people to do? Because these are not illiterate people. These are people who are very illiterate, and others may be functionally illiterate, but they are nevertheless literate. They can look at a paragraph, read it, and give it whatever kind of interpretation they want. They obviously know that they need to eat. They need to have 3 meals a day. They need to have decent clothes on their bodies. They need to function as respective members of society. This is what the leadership in Africa is not delivering. So, my friend, I think it is true, as many people say, frankly, that there is a leadership deficit in Africa.
Speaking of the leadership crisis in Africa, there is one quick comment from Serbia. Okwa Linga in Serbia. What's the problem? The people being led or the leaders who lead these people?
You could say it is either way, or it could be both. But at the end of the day, if somebody is considered a leader, I think he deserves to provide the direction to that community.
Okay, Shaka, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we're talking about something that you are in fact more familiar with. It's about police brutality in America.
Interesting. Very quickly, let's go to another quick comment. From Dar es Salaam, Kenyan politics needs to be handled very, very well, because at the end of the day, these leaders need to sit down and have a dialogue.
And why not? Why can't they in fact talk? Some of these guys have each other's telephone numbers. They could even call each other, laugh, and probably get together and have a glass of red wine. But if they could actually do that, why can't they in fact, even when their constituencies or the different types of constituencies that they represent, when they have concerns and what have you, why can't they in fact meet and figure out a way forward for the country? That's what is needed. And in a country like Kenya, unlike Uganda or Tanzania, you're not going to keep postponing it because, as I said earlier, first of all, they are very highly educated, very highly urbanized. Unlike Tanzania or Uganda for that matter, they don't even have land. And so, my friend, unless you sort their problems, at the end of the day, you may actually end up being the one that is sorted out.
Shaka, on that note, I thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
We've run out of time,
Thank
but
you.
it was a pleasure getting your insights on Kenya today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Keep those comments coming. We look forward to seeing you next week on another edition of SHAKA Extra Time. Excuse me.